Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and AP English and our ongoing study of Virgil's Aeneid. We now turn to Aeneid 5. Funeral Games for Anchises is the translation title that Fagles will give to this one. Now, this one, there's a lot of debate about how seriously we're supposed to take this book. There are some who will see this as simply an interlude book between the really dramatic book of Book 4, where, of course, Dido jacks herself at the conclusion of a hot and heavy love affair, and Book 6, where the most important book of the Aeneid, many argue, where Aeneas will travel into the underworld and meet his father Anchises' ghost and all of that. Also, we'll see Dido down there. This, of course, will take us, no question, back to the funeral games to Patroclus of Iliad 23, or to the land of the Phaeacians and their games in Odyssey 8. But I'm convinced there's a lot more going on here, and to me, this is in some ways what makes Virgil the great poet that he is. Because I think there's something else going on here. Follow my thought here for a second before we get into the study. Not only is this a return to Iliad 23 and Odyssey 8, as we have said, I really think that what's going on here is a celebration of the notion of contest. That is to say, the competitive spirit of the Romans is going to be celebrated here. I mean, we're going to ask this at the end of this lecture. Why is it the case that large numbers of people will get together and celebrate grown men, grown women, adolescent young men, adolescent young women, doing something as crazy as shooting a ball through a hoop, or kicking a ball into a net, or in the game of American football, grown men running a ball across a little white line? It's all kind of silly, isn't it? Well, I think that when we look at a book like Book 5 of Aeneid, we're reminded that these kinds of contests do more than simply entertain. They somehow are the stories that tell us who we are and what we care about. The stories we accept, the stories we reject. But I think there's something else going on here, and I think this is the heart of why this book for me is so important as it follows Book 4 and the departure of Aeneas from Carthage, leaving Dido on her funeral pyre, having stabbed herself to death out of, the horror of the fact that she's lost her guy. I think that we've got a different kind of contest that's already being articulated in Aeneid 4 into Aeneid 5, and that is this one. Aeneas has a competition between the private desires and the public need. Follow me for just a second. We are told, and it's pretty clear, that Aeneas would like to stay with Dido. I mean, he enjoys her, he enjoys Carthage, he has found a new home. Creosa, his wife, now has gone, and so he's found a new woman. That's his private desires and his interests. However, he leaves. Some will see this as, how dare he leave, high and dry, leave for Dido. The Romans didn't see it this way, and here's why. Virgil is, of course, leading the charge in this argument, and it is this: that the public needs are greater than the private needs and desires. In other words, Rome is greater than any one individual's interest needs. To that degree, if Aeneas had not left, that would have been a selfish act. See, this is counterintuitive to a lot of my students, which is why I'm taking my time here to say it. Some students will say, his running away and leaving Dido, what a selfish act that is. He's only interested in himself. That is not how Virgil, that is not how the Romans read this whole story. Rather, the contest is between the private and the public. By the way, it's a contest that will continue in our discussion in AP English as we get closer and closer to John Stuart Mill's classic essay on liberty. That dynamic between what I want to do individually and what the group needs me to do. When we pick up our study of Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxon Code, we'll come back to this idea again. We have a strong idea of it introduced at the conclusion of Aeneid 4 going into Aeneid 5, that there is something really profound about the decision that is made. And this decision that Aeneas makes to put the public interest of founding the great nation city first, then the nation of Rome, over his private interests is what makes him, in Virgil's mind, in the Romans' mind, we'll have to debate it today in our own postmodern way, whether we agree or disagree with the idea. But here it comes. Virgil will argue, this is what makes Aeneas a greater hero than either Achilles or Odysseus. While what drives them, it seems, is predominantly Time, Scooby Snacks, and Kleos, this notion of personal glory. Aeneas is driven by this call from Jupiter to found a great people. Why? Well, Jupiter will say it. Do it for the young people. Do it for your son, Ascanius. And of course, we're going to see Ascanius in Aeneid 5 in a really interesting light. Now, if you haven't been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, I recommend you get there. Go to the AP folder. I'm assuming that you have followed with me already the full book study of the Iliad and the Odyssey. That will be hypercritical again in our study here. Let's review where we've been in the first 4 books of the Aeneid quickly. In book 1, we have Juno, who will wreck Aeneas' ships. We have Venus, who will speak to Jupiter and say, please help. We have the famous prophecy that is ongoing, that will continue both in our study here of book 5 and then culminating in our study of book 6, that Aeneas is going to found the great Roman people. To Carthage he will come. There he will meet his mother Venus and doesn't realize it until the end. And then finally, of course, the meeting with Dido at the conclusion of Aeneid 1. Aeneid 2 is the fall of Troy, of course. Sinon, the lyre, the horse. We've got, of course, Pyrrhus killing Priam. We have Aeneas shouldering Anchises, his father. That will be significant because it will be a year since that happened and he left, as he is coming back here to Sicily in a bit. And then leading Ascanius, that will be significant. That is to say, you carry some of your past with you out of the city. You by hand are leading the future. And as we mentioned, Creüsa is lost in book 2, we're told in the story. In book 3, the end of the story. They leave Troy, they end up at Delios, they end up at Crete. They have the harpies that will make that prediction. You're going to be so hungry you eat your platters. They found little Troy there, and they find little Troy there with Helenus and Andromache. The prediction by Helenus, we'll come back to, that you're going to have to visit the Cumae Sibyl and go into the underworld and get information. We'll come back to it again. And then most importantly, at the end of Aeneid 3, Anchises will die in Sicily. So it makes sense that Aeneas would be coming back to Sicily one more time. In book 4, of course, we just did it. This is the Jack of Dido, isn't it? And Aeneas will leave. She kills herself. And of course, this is the true Roman tragedy. We turn now to book 5. And before we do, again, the hope is that you're reading this information on your own, using me to help guide you. Some of my students have said this is a boring book. I don't think so. And I think I can hopefully help you to see the ways in which this is a challenging book. Not so challenging in terms of the way it reads, certainly, although some students say they have difficulty getting through this book. But I think it's all about the competition, and we'll have more to say about that. Just to remind our learning theory, our desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways, especially in our annotative approach, where we're always looking to ask 3 guiding questions. Level 1, what does the text say? Summary. Level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, that's our rhetoric study. And there at the rhetorical level, we're asking specifically about symbolism and irony as we continue to do that through our study of both Iliad and Odyssey and now into the Aeneid. At level 3, we ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, how can I relate to other texts I know, especially the Iliad and the Odyssey, as well as other texts that I mess with? And then finally at 3B, well, how do I relate to this information personally? And I hope that my guiding questions at the end of each of these lectures is helping you guys do that. Let's summarize quickly book 5. First, Aeneas sees there behind him Dido's pyre, and they all kind of know what's going on, and then they set sail. They are headed towards Italy, but ultimately they have to be they end up at Sicily, where they will meet the king that's there, Anchises, and then they'll have these funeral games for the father of Aeneas, Anchises. We got this really interesting moment with a snake and 7 coils. We'll have to talk about that. At the tomb of Anchises, what's up with that? We'll have to talk about that. And then we have this contest. It's kind of like another attempt to explain why we have the Olympics today and why sport is so important. They have a ship race, they have a foot race, they have a boxing match, they have an archery contest, and then finally at the end you have a ceremony called the Trojan Corps, where the young men, led finally by Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, will come in, Anchises will come in, and you'll have this celebration of the young. While that's happening, Juno decides she's had enough of these guys trying to get to Italy, and so she sends Iris. Iris, in the form of Borea, will convince all of the women it's time to stay here and not do any more traveling, and they burn the ships. It will be only because Aeneas prays to Jupiter that the rain will stop the burning of the ships. However, talking with Achates, the decision is made, let's leave the old and the women here in Sicily as we go on. Now, in the same way that Virgil's got to get rid of Creusa at the end of the fall of Troy, so that ultimately Aeneas can marry a woman, a Latin woman, when he finally gets to Italy. In the same way, the Romans understood themselves as derived from the women of Italy. So you've got to get rid of all these women. So it's kind of a creative way, without killing them all off, I suppose, kind of a creative way for Virgil to get rid of all the women. So the women stay in Sicily with Achates, and the men will sail off. However, before they sail off, Aeneas has this important moment with the ghost of Anchises, where he is told, just like he was told by Helenus in Book 3, line 520, you've got to go down into the underworld using the Sibyl. And so Aeneas knows that he's got a kind of scary journey in front of him. Venus will have a conversation with Neptune, where she will ask Neptune to please, come on with this thing with Juno, would you please help us out here? And Neptune says that he will. However, he says one must be sacrificed. That one is Palinurus, who will go to sleep at the wheel, if you will, falls off the boat and dies. Like Elpenor in the Odyssey, right before Odysseus gets ready to go down into the underworld, Elpenor will die. Same will be with Palinurus, and you'll have the death of Palinurus right before Aeneas is ready to head down into the underworld. Well, let's go ahead now and turn, and as I've said about each one of these, and I love this book because of the way Virgil tries to create tension through especially the contests. I wish I could read it all, I can't, but let's at least read a few of the lines together. I'll start with the opening lines. Of course, Dido has just jumped onto her funeral pyre. All the while, we're told, Aeneas, steeled for a mid-sea passage, held the fleet on course, well on their way now, plowing the waves blown dark by a north wind, as he glanced back at the walls of Carthage, set aglow by the fires of tragic Dido's pyre. What could light such a conflagration? The question is asked, a mystery. But the Trojans know the pains of a great love defiled, and the lengths a woman driven mad can go, and it leads their heart down ways of grim foreboding. It's an interesting line. In other words, Virgil wants Romans to be reminded of all the stories, tragic stories. We think of Medea on stage. All of the tragic stories of women. Antigone comes to mind, who will take her own life as well. What a woman will do, especially if it's because of the pains of a great love, right? And there's some foreboding that will take place. They hit another storm. We have these storms, right? They, of course, work as symbolism, don't they? And we have Palinurus, who will say to Aeneas, we can't keep going. We're going to have to put into port in Sicily. We will go. Note the interesting irony. We will begin with Palinurus, and we will end with Palinurus. Palinurus, at the beginning of the book, is giving Aeneas orders, basically saying we got to pull into harbor in Sicily. And at the end, he will fall off the boat because he goes to sleep, and he will die. Aeneas then will tell him to change course. Sicily is fine, and there they arrive to meet Acestes. And Acestes is the king there of Trojan descent. And so Acestes will play a major role in this book, both at the beginning as well as at the end, because all these women are going to get left along with the aged with Acestes, and there will be a city that will be formed in that northwest corner of Sicily that will carry, in fact, his name even. Aeneas will speak. He tells us that it's been a year since he was back in Sicily where his father had died, and he says, let's celebrate. After 9 days, he says, we're going to have funeral games, and then he goes at line 95 or so to his father's tomb, and he begins to pray. When he prays, and of course his prayer is about finally reaching Italy's shores, at line 103, at his last words we're told, a serpent slithered up from the shrine's depths, drawing its 7 huge coils, 7 roiling coils, calmly enfolding the tomb. Now, of course, let's be reminded that Rome ultimately will be a city of 7 hills. So the number 7 will be significant for readers here. Okay? In other words, the snake comes up out of the ground, coils around the tomb of the altar of the father Anchises, right? Then we're told his back blazed with a maze of sea blue flecks, his scales with a sheen of gold, shimmering as a rainbow showers. And this is an interesting book because we begin with a rainbow and end with Iris, the goddess of the rainbow as well, only helping to burn all the ships of the Trojans. Iridescent sunlight arching down the clouds. Aeneas stopped, struck by the sight, as you can imagine. The snake, slowly sweeping along his length among the bowls and polished goblets, tested the feast. In other words, it actually tastes of the food, the libations that are left. Then back he slid below the tomb at line 112, harmless, slipping away from altars where he'd fed. And then we're told with fresh zeal, Aeneas resumes his father's rites, wondering, is the serpent the genius of this place, or his father's familiar spirit? And of course, at the end of the book, we will have that spirit of Anchises speaking directly to him. He actually calls his father's ghost here, and we will, of course, see this at the end of this book, and of course, in book 6, that will be the guiding principle of book 6, Anchises' ghost, right? The 9th day arrives, the audience arrives, the trophies are brought out. This sounds very much like Iliad 23, right? And then we have the first event, which will be a boat race, not a chariot race. It'll be likened to a chariot race. We don't have chariot races, we have boat races here. And we have a very interesting kind of event. Now, I wish I could read all this. I can, and I'm going to go through this quickly. I'm going to go through all these contests quickly. But the point that I want to make is that Virgil will again and again comment on the fact that certain competitors ultimately become founders of actual people within the Roman Empire itself. In other words, the celebration of the Roman competitive spirit. The boat race starts with some rules. We've got this rock out there that we're going to circle around, and then off they go. But we're told first, before they leave at line 157 or so, the oarsmen don their wreaths of popular leaves. Oil poured on their naked shoulders makes them glisten. They crowd the thwarts, their arms tense at the oars, ears tense for the signal, hearts pounding, racing, with nerves high strung, and a grasping lust for glory. I mean, this tells us, Virgil is telling us without saying it, why we love sport, right? Why we are so enamored of competition of some kind or another. At last, we're told, a piercing blare of the trumpet, suddenly, all the ships burst forth from the line. No stopping them now. The shouts of the sailors hit the skies. The oarsmen's arms pull back to the chests as they whip the swells to foam. Still, dead even, they plow their furrows, ripping the sea wide open with thrashing oars. And anybody who's ever done crew celebrates this kind of a passage because, of course, we love this idea of the competitive spirit and, of course, rowing together and tearing up the waves and all of that. Never so swift the teams in a 2-horse chariot race. So the likening to a chariot race, breaking headlong out of the gates to take the field. Not even when charioteers lay on the ripping reins, leaning into the windstroke, giving the teams full head. Resounding applause, cries of partisans fill the woods, and the curving bay shore rolls the sound around, and the pelted hillsides volley back the roar. In other words, the crowd goes crazy and all of that. And immediately at 3A, you're supposed to jot down right away, what is your favorite text that plays this exact same game? We asked that question, didn't we, when we did Iliad 23. We will have we'll have something similar to the chariot race, by the way, in Iliad 23, where you're going to have Antilochus and Menelaus who will have their little exchange or their attempt to try to one-up the other, and then, of course, at the end, you'll have the back and forth of Iliad 23. Same gig going on here. We have Gaius who is taking off, trying to find a way to win this thing. He hates to lose. He throws because his pilot, Minotes, screws it up. He throws him out of the boat, Gaius does, And the kid has to swim to a rock in the ocean, and everyone's kind of laughing at him as sitting on his rock there. We have the Sergistus, who is going to call to his men, "Put your backs into it, men," he says. "You're the ones I chose," at line 215. "You're the ones I chose, my troops at Troy's last stand. Now, show the nerve, the heart." He says, "If only." He says, let Neptune pick the winner," he says. "If only we could win." He says, "But we must not come last," line 220. "What shame! Just win that victory, O my Trojans. Spare us that disgrace." The idea being that Sergistus would say, losing is something not even in our wheelhouse, right? We refuse to lose. We have the ongoing race, and what happens then is that Sergistus gets too close to the rock. He shatters all of his oars. We have roars of the crowd re-echoing at 2:55, cheering on this challenge. The air resounds with cries. One crew, strung by the shame of losing victory now with victory won, would trade their lives for fame. In other words, they're willing to die if they could just win. The competitive spirit, if you will, takes over. Cleanthes will win, but the way he wins at line 260 is by praying to the gods, and they help him win. And Cleanthes then will get the gift. And then we're told about these different gifts that are given. They're presented with a crown of laurel, right? And we know all about the laurel tree, as we've told in earlier lectures. When you win, you get this laurel tree. Or a cloak, we're told, the winner of a cloak, braided gold that's fringed with twin remplets. And we're told at line 280 how art always seems to want to tell stories, very much like Achilles' shield in Iliad 17, very similar kind of thing. The second place winner, Menenthius, who will win a coat of mail. Gaius will come in third. And then Sergistus will come in bringing his ship. We're told at 3:05, a laughing stock. We're told, shorn of glory, the ship comes crawling in. And then you get this really interesting epic simile, like a snake caught, as they often are, on a causeway, crushed by a bronze wheel or heavy rock flung by a traveler, trampled, left half dead, trying to slip away, writhing in gnarled coils. We think about, of course, the snake we just saw a few minutes ago, right? No hope.